Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. So this is Part 2, Station, Chapter 17, Jack. 9 days after the supplements were set, one of the demon's micropickets jumped back into station space. "Captain, micropicket just jumped into our space. It's the demons," Mark said. "Get the messages, Jack. Mark, call the XO." I downloaded the messages from the picket and queued up the message from Darian marked urgent. Jansen ran into ops, and the captain gave her a moment to catch her breath. "All right, Jack, put it on." I tapped play. "Hey all, it took 3 days of them taking the stuff you sent, but they're on their way. That's the good news. Bad news is 2 more died before the stuff got here. Science Director Ed says thanks and that they'll send a weekly update. They can manage more moving about, but it still makes them pretty tired. I'll stay here another day and do the burials. The team told me what to do with the other 2, so you don't need to send that. I'll see you in a little over a week. Bye." The video ended, and I checked the message for any attachments. Darren had sent health reports for the team members, how much of the supplement they had taken, and their vitals before they went into the scaper. "Captain, Lucifer was right. The guy may be a little odd, but he's very thorough. He's attached data about the team's initial condition when he arrived and when they left." "Excellent. Send that to Carr." The captain paused for a moment. "Jack, open a station-wide channel." They took an audible breath as I did what they asked. "Attention all personnel, this is the captain. Thanks to Dr. Carr's and Lucifer's medical staff and Lucifer's demon rider Damien, the pre-call team are now on their way back to station. They've been in the scaper for 6 days now and should be here in just under 5 months. While I know there will be more work to do, I'd like to thank the teams for their hard work and in being able to get us to this point. Beckett out." I closed the channel. "Thank all the gods and spirits of the universe," said Jansen. "Amen to that," said Mark. I just nodded. While I shared everyone's relief, I still felt something wasn't quite right. I wonder if it was because of my new relationship to the Morrigan. "Not really," she said. "You've always had very good instincts. You're just more aware of them now." I nodded to myself and continued to parse the rest of the message from the micropicket. "Captain, there are several messages for you from the pre-call science director marked priority, and some personal mail. Go ahead and route the priority mail into my office, and take care of the rest. Has there been anything from the Roanoke yet?" "No, sir." "Okay, route it to me directly when you get anything from Captain Mitchell." "Got it, sir." The captain stood. "Jansen, ops is yours." "Sir," she said, and took the command station. I looked up as the captain went into their office. From the way that they walked, I could tell that the captain wasn't at ease either. When I went into the mess after my shift, it was strangely empty except for a couple of people. I saw Marcia sitting at a table near one of the windows, so I grabbed my dinner and went to join her. She saw me and waved. "Where is everybody?" I asked. "On the Lightbringer for a hooray, they're on the scaper party. From what I've heard from the survey folks who've come over here, their ships have some pretty wild parties, particularly the engineering ship, Hephaestus. Apparently when Hephaestus has a ship-wide party, it becomes stuff of legend." "Really?" "Think of classical Greek Dionysian orgies with food, wine, and robots." The look on my face must have been something because Marcia laughed. "The legend goes that Hephaestus stumbled on some ancient Earth history about a legendary porn and magazine creator named Hugh Hefner, who used to be called Hef, and was intrigued. He then started having people call him Hef and using male pronouns. Let's just say that Hef has many interesting androids of many genders that he likes to put part of himself into at any given time. Not my cup of tea, really, but apparently for all of Hef's hedonism, he and his people are masters at what they do." I took a mouthful of food and nodded. "I don't think that would be my cup of tea either, but that sounds interesting. Are Lucifer's parties like that too?" "Some are, but Lucifer likes to make sure all their guests are happy, so they ensure that there are different types of parties all over the ship. So there will be some hedonistic ones, but there will also be some relaxed spaces, places for jam sessions, and even some boring ones. Marcia winked. I laughed. That sounds more my style these days. Just give me a bowl of salsa, some chips, and a few people I know, and that's about as much party as I want. Marcia took a sip of her drink and nodded. I hear that. I think there were some folks doing pretty much that in the chapel later. I even heard there might be a 2D movie involved. You heard, eh? I raised an eyebrow. Marcia grinned. Well, I may have had a hand in setting it up. Well, I am in as long as it's not alien. Marcia grimaced. Really? I sighed. I'll come for a while for snacks, but I can't watch that one anymore. Sorry, it wasn't my idea, it was Chris's. I was outvoted. But we probably won't play it till later anyway. Come by at 1800, though. Chef did make salsa. Apparently there's a bumper crop of tomatoes in hydroponics last week. Marcia looked apologetic. No worries. I looked at my wristcom. Looks like we have enough time to finish dinner before we need to go. I looked at her and then asked, what did you want to see? A movie called Crossroads. I shrugged. I didn't know it. She continued, it's a movie from 20th century Earth, where a young kid who's into blues music sort of kidnaps an older blues musician to find a lost blues song. It has Papa Legba in it. I laughed. Of course. That sounds like something I could get into. I do like blues. We could watch it in the common room on the bunk level and invite other weirdos who don't want to watch Alien to come with. Sure, why not? Done. I'll make sure to steal some extra chips and salsa from the chef. I happen to know that chef also likes blues music, Marcia said with a mischievous grin. We ate in silence for a little bit. Then Marcia said, you know, Jack, you've changed a lot since you've come on station. Really? The chaplain nodded. When you first got here, you would barely talk to anyone and didn't really mingle with any of the crew. You barely did anything outside your quarters but go to the gym and eat. Now you're actually doing things outside of your work time, and you've made a few friends. That's quite a bit of progress. I was taken aback. It didn't feel like much progress. I was still having flashbacks, still not comfortable in large, loud groups, but thinking about it, she wasn't wrong. I had been doing mostly okay for the last few weeks, even with all that was going on. I said out loud. I guess you're right. Doesn't feel all that big of a deal, though. Although I suppose it's a bit of the same for you, yeah? She nodded. A bit. Not the same, though. The Morrigan prodded a memory. You told me that trauma is trauma, Marcia, no matter what and for how long. Marcia put down her fork and looked out the window for a bit, then gave a little laugh. Funny. I've told that to so many people over the years, and it's the first thing I forget when it comes to myself. The Morrigan prodded again and said through me, Every priest needs a priest, I said, and blinked. Marcia stared at me for a moment, then laughed again. Deities can be a pain in the ass when they really start talking to you, she said. You're not wrong there. Could you ask next time? I thought at the Morrigan. Not enough time to ask, child, she replied. I shook my head and took a last drink of water. The decision seemed to click into place in my head. Marcia, listen, if you need someone to talk to, come find me. I mean, I know it wasn't the same kind of trauma and all, but, well, you can crash in my bunk anytime you need to. Marcia took my hand and something connected between us, making my heart leap. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it. Then she let go. I'm done. How about you? I nodded. I'll take both of them to the window. Thanks. I'll meet you in the rec room? She asked, as she got up and followed me over to the dish window. Yeah, see you over there. I think I'm going to go put some sweats on. Okay, see you in a bit. She waved as she walked out the door. When I turned to the dish window, the ensign behind the window looked at me with a look that said, Good luck. I sighed, put down the trays, and left quickly. But the look from the ensign had me thinking, What was this between me and Marcia? A gentle chuckle sounded in my head. Shut up, I told her as I made my way to my bunk. The morale boost from the pre-call team finally leaving the planet was dampened 3 months later when an urgent message came from the scaper. Captain, we lost another one today, the science director said weakly in the video. It was the first time we'd seen a video from the pre-call team in months. The man had lost significant amounts of weight in the short time he'd been sick, and it showed. I wasn't the only person to gasp in ops when the message started playing. This time it was the field commander. The man scrubbed his face and his eyes looked hollow. He looked back at the camera and cleared his throat. It wasn't because of the illness. We put her body in the secondary airlock for now. Just thought you should know. Most of us are doing better now with the meds you sent. The worst of us are now able to sit up and eat real food at least once a day. Julie and I have been the only ones who can stand for more than an hour for a while, so we've been taking it in turns to make sure everyone gets food and water and meds. We do have a couple more who can now help us out, so Julie and I have been able to rest a bit more. We've all been feeling kind of nervy since the injections, though. The scientist paused and looked away from the camera as we heard another indistinct voice. Devi wants to thank all the doctors again, and to thank you all for not leaving us dirtside. I'm grateful for that, too. Hopefully when we get there in a couple of months, you'll have this figured out. Make 'em out. The picture of the older scientist froze, and there was silence in ops. Automatically, I turned off the video, which made some people in ops jump. I turned from my station to see a few other people who had come in to ops while the message was playing, who were standing in shock. The captain said gently, "As you were, people." Everyone seemed to remember that they had other places to be. The captain waited for the crowd to thin, then said, "Jack, route the message to Dr. Carr and Marcia. Are there any other messages?" "Just some personal mail to route to the relay and telemetry from the scaper." The captain nodded. They sat back in their chair and busied themselves with their readouts. I turned back to my station again, sorted the rest of the mail, and monitored the real-time comms. About an hour or so before shift change, the captain said to Mark, "Can you call Jansen and the second shift comms officer early, please?" "Yes, sir." I had a feeling about what Beckett was planning, and when the XO and second shift comms officer came in, the captain turned to me and said, "Take a walk with me, Jack." They started walking out of ops. "Sir," I said, and followed. I could feel the other's eyes on us as we left. They led the way past hydroponics towards the chapel. Marcia's door was open, meaning she's still on duty. The captain stopped at the entrance, seeming a little unsure of what they were about to ask. The anxiety dragon in me didn't want to make this easy on them, and certainly wanted them to suffer for what they'd done. The other part of me just wanted to run, although there wasn't really any place I could hide from this. "There was a price, Jack," the Morgan said. Fuck, I thought, and sighed in resignation. Marcia looked up from her tablet. "Sam? Jack?" "Can we come in?" asked the captain. "Yes, please," and Marcia motioned us to sit. The captain closed the door. I saw Marcia wince a bit, but she tried not to let it show on her face. Beckett missed it. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I need information from Jack in order to help the pre-call team, and I thought that it would help if you were in the room." Beckett turned to face me, then finally asked, "Can you tell me what happened to your pre-call team, especially what happened once they were in the scaper? I know you've told me some, but I need to know what I'm up against, and you're the only person on station that knows what being in a scaper for 5 months is like." I looked at the captain, then to Marcia. The chaplain gave a small nod and a look that said, "I'm here." I took a seat on the couch and looked down at my hands, not really seeing anything else in the room. I nodded. Chapter 18. Jack. I began to speak. I felt distance as if it wasn't really me speaking, but some nameless narrator. "You did what, Lieutenant?" said Commander Janet Dmitriev sternly. I shot, something, sir. It startled me. It looked like a big bug, the ensign pleaded. The commander paced behind her desk in her prefab office. Ensign, what's the pre-call rule about native plants and animals? Don't shoot anything unless it's actively attacking you. But, sir... The look she gave him stopped his protest. Jack was trying hard not to burst out laughing. He hoped he was keeping a straight face. Janet didn't dare look at Jack until after the ensign left. Exactly. Now, the scientists are going to bitch because you, ensign, just gave them more work to do. So, to make it up to them, I'm assigning you to sample cataloging and processing. I'd better not hear that you're slacking or doing it wrong either. Dismissed. The ensign saluted and left as quickly as protocol allowed. Only when the door closed did Jack start to snicker. After a moment, Janet's face softened and she let out a quiet laugh. Oh, good gods, she said. Did you see the look on his face when I told him he was going to do sample cataloging? I know, right? I don't know what's worse for the grunts, cataloging or waste duty, Jack said between laughs. They both took a minute to get it out of their systems. Then Jack said seriously, Do you think these bugs might be a problem? I'm not sure. Donna's biologists are dissecting it now. Thankfully, the pulse rifles don't do as much damage to things as projectile weapons. Strangely, though, they weren't seen from our orbital scans. Well, not everything is found by Survey or Unity's orbital scanning. No one's able to do that, no matter what legends are about Survey, Jack replied. Truth. Well, we might want to push back the xenobio excursion until after they figure out more about this thing. Ugh, they're not going to like that. They've been itching to get out into the forest for weeks. Janet sighed. Yeah, I know, but better safe than sorry. Let them know, would you? Right. Oh, and happy anniversary. You two doing anything special tonight? The commander smiled. Having a quiet dinner alone in our bunk. Apparently Donna had Cook do something special for us. Nice. Have a great night then. See you tomorrow. Good night, Jack, she replied, and Jack left. The xenobiolab was on the way to his bunk, so he stopped in to give the bad news. Donna was standing over a younger scientist who had their hands in an isolation pod. In the pod was the bug that the errant ensign had killed. Holy shit, the scientist said. You see that? Yeah, the younger scientist said. Look at all those nerve cells. They have a strange color to the axons, too. Might be some sort of metal attached to the fatty acids instead of just fat for insulation. Damn, this is cool. Cool is right. Go ahead and start preparing the slides for the imager. Might as well make slides with all the stains and see which would work. With all the extra molecules in there, who knows? Also, prep some electron microscope slides of all the major cells. I'd like to see if the cell structure matches the plant life here. Okay, on it. And the junior scientist got to work. Donna turned around then and, seeing Jack, came over to talk to him. What's up, Jack? How hard did Janet go on that poor ensign? She asked. Jack smiled. Well, you'll have some extra cataloging help for the time being. The woman laughed. Poor thing. He'll have to work with Edgar, that bore. Why that man is in pre-call, I'll never know. But he does know taxonomy. She paused. Well, good. But I take it you're here to tell me bad news so that I don't murder my wife on our anniversary. Something like that. All right, out with it. Jack looked over at the scientist working on the bug. Janet wants to push back the xenobio trip until after you finish analyzing the bug. Oh, Eva isn't going to be happy, but Janet's right. Well, it could be worse. She could have canceled it altogether. Thanks, Jack. He smiled. No worries. And really, keep it down tonight, would you? Donna grinned mischievously. No promises. Jack shook his head and headed out to his bunk, followed by Donna's laughter. A week later, in the monthly all-hands meeting, Donna shared her findings with the rest of the group. Jack couldn't follow all of the biology, but it seemed the conclusion was harmless vegetarian, which seemed okay to him. Apparently it seemed that way to Janet too, because she green-lighted the xenobio team to do a first overnight in the tree line. There was a buzz of excitement in the air as the meeting broke up, since it would be the first trip anyone took out of the pre-call compound. So far, there were no major predators on the planet that they could find, which was unusual, but not too weird. A 2-night trip should be fairly easy and routine. If that's so, Jack thought, why do I have a bad feeling about this trip? The team had checked in at nightfall, letting them know that they had made camp and were ready to have dinner and turn in. The tree line was about 2 hours by rover, giving them enough time to gather samples on the way. Jack decided to stay up and monitor comms, and when the other comms officer came in for night watch, Jack stuck around. He did some paperwork, and then started to read a book on his tablet. "Sir, why don't you go to bed? I've got things covered here," she said. Jack was still uneasy. Maybe he was just being cautious? He sighed, turned off his tablet, and stood up. "Yeah, maybe you're right, Lieutenant. I guess I'm being a bit of a mother hen, huh?" "Maybe," she started to reply when a burst of static came in on the radio. "Base camp, we're getting attacked, we need—" A loud buzzing sound came over the radio, along with sounds of strangled screaming. "Shit, I hate it when these feelings are right," Jack thought, then said out loud, "Go wake the commander and tell her I'm taking a team out there. No one else leaves the compound." Jack took 5 other soldiers with him. Cooper was piloting the air sled, which was much faster than the rover, and would get them to the campsite in 20 minutes. The pilot had insisted on coming along, since his husband, one of the xenobiologists, was on the excursion. When Jack couldn't persuade the man to stay behind, he relented, mostly because he was one of the few people on the team that could fly the sled with any skill. They reached the tree line. The flora was jungle-like, with large leaves and vines hanging down from above. The team moved as quietly as they could through the trees and around the campsite. As they got closer, there was a buzzing, rattling sound. The closer they got to the faint human life signs on their wrist comms, the louder the buzzing grew. Jack silently signaled to Cooper to move around to the other side. Large leaves hid the campsite. In addition to the rattling buzz, he could now hear a slurping sound. He was afraid and a little sick at the noises, but he shifted the leaves in front of him, slowly and quietly. The same insect-like things that the soldier had shot a week ago were now feasting on what was left of the xenobiology team. Jack was paralyzed with fear for a moment. Then the sound of the voice near him shouted, "Michael!" Jack stabbed at the retreat signal on his wrist comm, then made his way to Cooper. Fuck, Jack thought. When he reached the other man, another soldier was trying to hold him back. "Let me go! That's my husband!" Jack slapped him. "Shut up, dumbass! We gotta go!" But before they started to turn away, Jack realized that the buzzing and slurping noises had stopped. "Stay still," Jack whispered, and turned towards the carnage. The bugs were facing Jack and the other soldiers as if they could see the humans through the trees. Jack's instincts kicked in and he shouted, "Run! Get to the sled!" The other soldiers broke and ran, but Cooper broke his grip and yelled, "Michael!" shooting off his pulse rifle in all directions. Jack tried to go back for Cooper, but it was too late. The bugs engulfed the man before he could even scream. After that, Jack didn't think twice. He just ran like hell. Hans got to the sled first and started it up. Jack got on next, helped the next guy on board. The third was able to get on, but one of the last 2 tripped. The other man left on the ground went to help them, but they were too slow. The bugs swarmed them just outside the tree line. Hans didn't hesitate as he punched the controls, and the sled sped back to the compound. "Fucking hell," said Hans. "I thought they said those things were harmless." "They also said they were vegetarian," said Jack in a tight voice. "Can we move this thing any faster? I have a feeling they might not stay stopped at the tree line." "I'm already pegging the meters, mate." "Right." Jack stood next to the large blond man and willed the sled to go faster. When they finally reached the compound, Jack had Hans fly the sled right through the gates. "Close the gates!" he shouted, and the people manning the gates obeyed. "Turn on the electrics!" Jack breathed a small sigh of relief as he heard the buzz of electricity running through the outer walls. They all stumbled out of the air sled as the commander and the science director caught up with them. "Jack, what the hell happened?" Jack took some steadying breaths. Bugs aren't vegetarian. Xenobio team is gone, along with Cooper, Yusuke, and Chang. The bugs swarmed them before they could get to the sled. Fucking hell, exclaimed Janet. Oh my gods, the neurons, Donna said. She turned to Janet and said quickly, these bugs had more neurons and brain than a creature that size should have had. They must have some kind of hive mind if they can swarm like that. Yeah, they have this rattlebuzz too, said Hans. Like a rattlesnake. It's crossed with a mosquito. Does this mean we can hear them coming? Asked Janet. Jack hesitated for a moment. Possibly, but they got quiet before they swarmed us. Right, I'm calling it, said Janet. But, Donna interjected, no, I'm not taking any chances. We're prepping for evac. Get people up. Jack, can we deploy the electric fencing to the scaper? Jack nodded. Yes, but I don't know how long the generators will hold out against that swarm. Janet thought for a moment. Do it anyway. It'll be the only way we can get everyone there. Right, on it. The rest of the night was spent preparing to evac. The first round of people went as soon as the fence passage to the main scaper hatch was ready. Donna had already started down the path with the first group of scientists when suddenly the rattlebuzz started outside the walls. The scaper was just about 1 kilometer from the compound, and it had taken most of the night to set up the fencing. The group moved faster as the buzzing got louder, and then mixed with the fizz of the electric wiring. The air filled with an acrid stench of burning bugs. The rattlebuzz just got louder and angrier. Jack and Janet had just waved the second group to go through when the generator gave out and the first bugs came over the wall. Donna! Janet shouted as one of the wall panels came crashing down on the leaders of the first group. As the bugs swarmed down the tunnel, Jack knew that the rest of them couldn't get out that way. Close the gate! You have to go around the other side, Jack ordered. No, you can't! They'll die! Janet screamed at him. They're already dead, Jack yelled back. You can't leave them, she yelled again, and now he could see that he had lost his commander. He punched her to knock her out, then dragged her with him and the last members of the team. Marcus, you and Ellis bring up the rear. Shoot anything that moves that isn't human. Hans, help me. Hans grabbed the commander's other arm, and they ran for the opposite gate, making for the secondary scaper airlock. A soldier and one of the scientists started throwing pulse grenades out the gate. The rattlebuzz moved away. Got any more of those? Jack yelled. About 10, one of them answered. Good, clear path while most of these things are still focused on the tunnel. They all piled in behind the human grenade launchers. The rest had picked up phase pistols and were shooting at any bugs coming near. Hans got to the scaper first and opened it. David came in next and went right to the engine room. Jack was right behind him. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, Jack thought, as they managed to get Janet into the scaper. We're not going to make it. Most of their group managed to stagger past him into the ship, but Ellis and Marcus were still at the edge of the stairs. Ellis, Marcus, get your asses in here. Move, said Jack from the scaper doors. But there might be someone still trying to get here, Ellis said from the door. I doubt it. Listen. Hans shouted. The rattlebuzz was starting to get louder. Jack had thought they had just finished with those in the tunnel and were looking for the rest of the team. Move it! We can't lose our only pilot. Ellis obeyed and jumped into the scaper. Marcus, who was farther away from the door, screamed as the bugs took him down. Hans didn't hesitate, slamming the door shut as the bugs climbed up the ramp. Jack looked at the very few people that were left, then turned to Ellis and said, Get us the fuck out of here. Ellis nodded, breathing hard, and got up from the floor, making for the cockpit. Hans followed him. What do we do now? Asked Julia, the CMO. Jack looked over at Janet, who was sitting on the floor, staring at nothing, then looked back at the CMO. Right, why don't you treat the wounded and help the others pick their bunks and all that? Sure, she said. She paused for a moment, then said quietly, Listen, Janet's going to be in shock for a while. I can give her a sedative, but I think you just landed in command. Fuck me, Jack said to himself. Yeah, you're probably right. Go on, get us out of here. I'll get Janet to the captain's bunk, Julia said. He nodded. Jack walked to the middle of the scaper and said loudly, "All right, folks, find a bunk and strap in so we can get the fuck out of here." Much to his surprise, everyone obeyed without question. Jack moved to the cockpit and strapped himself into one of the seats there. "Hans, can you get a signal to station?" "Been trying, Jack, but I think the comms are buggered, literally." "Fuck." Jack pressed his wrist comm. "David, are the engines up?" "Yeah, go, go, go." "You heard the man, Derek. Get us the fuck out of here." A roaring sound echoed through the ship, and then the G-force of liftoff forced them into their seats. Only then did Jack start to think about the fact that he was now in command of a failed pre-call team. As the scaper shot through the atmosphere into space, he stared out the window and watched as bugs burned and fell off the ship. "Fuck you, you little assholes," he thought, as he tried not to break out in hysterical laughter. The first couple weeks in the scaper were quiet. Everyone was in mourning. Only 15 of the original 60 team members had survived. Janet was nearly catatonic and would barely talk to anyone, and she definitely didn't want to talk to Jack at all. He left her to herself and saw to the running of the scaper so she didn't have to. Luckily, food and water weren't a problem at all, since the scaper was loaded for food for 60 people for 6 months. He thanked whatever powers that be for small favors. Julia led a small memorial service, which Jack wasn't sure about, but it seemed to be good for the people that wanted it. Janet didn't come. At the end of the 3rd month, people were getting irritable, but also some were pairing off. Jack and Hans started sleeping together early on, with Jack welcoming the other man's comforting touch. Janet avoided everyone still. She would only open the door for someone to put food inside her door or to use the toilet. The empty food containers in the hall were the only way they knew she was still alive. By the 4th month, most folks seemed to relax a little bit. Jack had to stop a fight between Hans and Edgar that had come to blows, but after that, some of the steam seemed to go out of everyone's grumbling. When more members of the group realized that they were almost back to station, the mood seemed to lighten a little, except for Janet. Jack was sitting on watch, staring at the useless comm panel when Julia came and sat with him. "Hey, Julia, what's up?" he asked. She had a worried look on her face. "I went to bring Janet her dinner, and she didn't open up. I didn't want to just barge in on her, so I left it by her door a few hours ago. I went back to check, and it was still there and sealed." "Oh, for fuck's sake, I'm over it," he thought. Out loud he said, "Come on, I'll try. Maybe me being there will piss her off enough to eat." Julia opened her mouth, closed it again, then nodded with a frown. "Janet, come on, you need to eat." Jack pressed the door chime on her cubicle again. He knocked on the metal plating and heard the echo coming from the inside of the cubicle, but no answer to the knock. He looked through the small window and could see that the light was off. That was odd. He punched his wrist comm to call into the cockpit. "Ellis." "Yeah, what?" "Open the commander's bunk, now." "Why? She said she wasn't to be disturbed." "Just do it, now." "Why? She said she wasn't to be disturbed." "Just do it, now." "All right, keep your shirt on, Kirby." The door hissed open. There was blood everywhere. "Janet," he yelled, and rushed into the cubby, but it was too late. He backed out rapidly, shaking his head as he felt the bile rise. Julia rushed in, calling for the remaining nurse. Someone stood in front of him, grabbed his hands, and said, "Kirby!" He tried to get away from them, but the hands held firm. "Jack!" And the hands went to his face and made him look. Hans stood in front of him while others crowded around. Hans looked into Jack's eyes with the same sadness Jack felt. "Jack, wait until we get back to your bunk," Hans whispered. "You have to lead now." Jack nodded, and Hans let go of him. Julia came out, quietly said something to one of the scientists, who went off to the medical bay. The CMO came over to Jack. "There's nothing we can do. Somehow she was able to make some sort of blade and cut her wrists. She did it just after lunch, I think. I've sent Basil off for the body bag. I hate to sound crude, but we'll need to store her somewhere until we get to station." Jack breathed out. "Use the secondary airlock. It's the only place we can put her." Julia nodded, then went back into the commander's bunk. Hans and Jack walked back to the common area of the scaper. Jack looked around and saw the rest of the group standing around wanting to know what happened. Jack took a breath and scrubbed his hands through his hair. "The commander took her own life," he said bluntly. The listening crew broke down in tears, shock, and anger. At him, at the universe, at Station, and anything else people could think of. A couple stood quietly, just looking at him. The doctor is taking care of her body now. I'll need someone who knows how to program to seal off her room." David raised his hand from the other side of the room. "I'll do it, Jack," he said quietly. "Thanks," Jack said. "That's all." And he went into his own bunk, followed by Hans. When the door closed on the two men, Jack broke down. Hans stayed with him and helped him put himself together. By the time they reached Station, Jack was able to function almost normally again. The problem with the comms on the scaper was outside the ship, since all diagnostics from the inside said that the comms equipment was functional. The only way they could communicate was for someone to go out in an EV suit and call the station from the suit. Jack wouldn't let anyone else volunteer and went out himself. "Lieutenant Jack Kirby reporting from B-1587 pre-call team, reporting evac and planet failure." "Is this station B-1587? Thank the spirits you're alive, Kirby. When the picket found the scaper but couldn't get through, we thought the worst," replied the station captain. "A life form on the planet damaged the comms antennas on the outside of the scaper, sir. We barely got out ourselves." "Acknowledged. What's the team situation, Lieutenant?" 14 living survivors, 1 death during transit." The revelation was met with silence for long enough that Jack asked, "Station?" "Come again, Lieutenant? Did you say 14 survivors?" "Yes, sir." The connection went silent again for a moment. Then the captain came on again. "It will be a few hours before we can set up the quarantine hab. Since we can't maneuver the scaper into position, you'll have to EVA out. We'll run a line for you. Have everyone suited up and ready to go in 4 hours. One of our team will also take the body." "Who was it that died, son?" "Commander Janet Dimitrioff, sir." Another long pause. "Damn. All right, Lieutenant. We'll come get you shortly." The EVA walk from the scaper to the quarantine hab was uneventful. The commander's body was left in cold storage. The hab didn't have gravity or privacy. Doctors in EV suits and drones took blood and other samples for testing every day. There was nothing to do between meals and blood draws except read or watch vids. By the end of the first week of quarantine, everyone was irritable again. With no way that Hans and Jack could have time alone, Jack was just as irritable as everyone else. "Shut the fuck up, asshole," Jack heard Hans say as he was coming out of a nap in his sleeping bag. "I don't give a shit what you say, faggot. He fucked this up from the start, and he's the reason the commander's dead," the large man said. "Fuck off, Edgar," Julia said. "I did the autopsy and she did it to herself." Jack opened his eyes and shrugged out of the sleeping bag. He floated over to where Hans, Julia, Edgar, and a few others were hanging and having their dinner. "What the fuck is going on, people?" "Oh, the little lordling is up from his nap, eh?" said Edgar snidely. "Excuse me, what?" Jack said. "You heard me." "What the fuck is your problem, man?" said someone else. "My problem? My problem is this asshole taking over command without even asking the rest of us if we wanted to follow him." He turned to me. "My problem is you and your pansy-ass boyfriend lording it over the rest of us. My fucking problem is you," he yelled, and pushed off the hab wall, slamming Jack into the wall on the other side, with his hands at Jack's throat. Jack put up his hands barely in time, struggling to keep the bigger man's hands from closing. Some in the hab were yelling at him to stop, and others were egging him on. Jack felt almost like he was starting to float out of his body, but suddenly the bigger man went limp, and Jack shoved him away. Behind Edgar was Julia and the station's CMO in a hazmat suit with an injector. Jack blinked a few times, feeling something wet on the back of his head. He put his hand to his head, and when he pulled it back, there were bright red drops of blood floating in the 0G of the hab. Before the doctor knocked him out with an injector, he thought the drops were like beads floating on water. He woke to his head cleaned and healed, and 2 groups in the hab instead of 1. They each marked their spaces, and neither group would talk to the other. Jack felt like a command failure. When they were finally released from quarantine, Jack ran for the privacy of the quarters assigned to him. He left to eat and use the gym, but otherwise luxuriated in privacy. Hans joined him a few times, and Jack went to Hans once in a while. But other than that, Jack stayed out of everyone's way. When the carrier came to pick them up, he asked to be brought back to Earth. Hans came with him, and the trip to Earth had some tender moments between the 2 of them, but when they landed on humanity's homeworld, they parted ways. Jack felt he was a failure, and few understood what it was like to be on a failure team. He was adrift for a while, but then took the assignment on the new station. Anything was better than dwelling in pain on Earth. I finished telling the captain my story. Both they and Marcia were silent. The captain looked at me, a mix of pity and respect in their face. Marcia just had empathy in her eyes. No judgment, no blame. She gave me a small smile, then turned to the captain. They looked at her, then looked at me, and said, "Thank you, Jack. I appreciate this. Marcia, can we talk about your plan later?" Marcia nodded. The captain put a hand on my shoulder, then left the room, closing the door behind them. I barely noticed. I was still wrapped up in my own mind, with my own whirling memories and emotions. I heard footsteps, and felt someone in front of me. I looked up, finally, to see that Marcia was standing in front of me, eyes full of concern, love, and without judgment, without condition. She sat down next to me and took me into her arms, holding me in a way I didn't realize I needed. I wept without shame. Chapter 19. Jenny. To Jenny at Lightbringer, from Mark at Station A4413.Unity. The captain told me you went to Lightbringer. I tried to find you at the scaper parties, but no one knew where you were. I'm not sure what to say in this email, so I'll just write what I'm thinking, and you can decide what you want to do. It doesn't matter to me that you're trans, and it doesn't matter to me what you did before you went into Unity Fleet. Truth is, I love you. I didn't realize just how much until you left. It sucks being without you, and I'd rather be with you than on station. Shit. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but if I let you to believe that I was freaked out by what you told me, then I'm sorry. It wasn't that at all. Truth is, I recognized Morgan the day he asked you to come to his office. This isn't known much, since Unity doesn't really make it public, but I'm an exile from a lost colony called New Harmony. I can explain in more detail if you want later, but the short version is that it's a religiously strict planet, and if you're anything other than cis, straight, and white, you have no power. I was in the upper classes, but I'm bi. They caught me having sex with another man, so they checked me off planet and left me to die. Thankfully, Unity's taken to picking up the exiled, so they rescued me and gave me a new life. I recognized Morgan from his voice. They sent a bunch of men out to Unity when I was a kid. I didn't expect to run into him here. I wanted to warn you, but I didn't know what he wanted with you, and I wasn't sure if he knew about me. I'm glad he's under arrest now, though, and that you're away from him. He was from the clergy class, and they're all dangerous and evil. I don't know how he forced you to do what you did, but I know it wasn't your fault. Like I said, he's an evil motherfucker. So that's it. I love you, Jenny, and I want to be with you. More than that if you want it. But I'd understand if you were freaked out, or whatever. I won't bother you anymore if you don't want me to. Just tell me what you want, and I'll respect it. I miss you a lot. I put the tablet on the table in the gazebo after rereading Mark's message for the 3rd time. God damn it, I said out loud. Are you all right, Jenny? Asked Lucifer. I don't know. Did you know that Mark was an exile from this New Harmony place? I asked. Yes, he was one of the few exiles we'd hoped to recruit to accompany you on this mission. It would be easier to fake a married couple on New Harmony than creating a legend for a single woman. I rubbed my hands over my head, trying to make sense of what Lucifer and Survey were asking me to do. I stood up and went to the edge of the gazebo, looking out over the gardens. They reminded me of the gardens in Central Park in the Capitol on New York's colony. I knew this was even bigger than Central Park, as it also was on the edge of Lightbringer's university farms. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn I was on a planet. I sighed. "May I ask you a question, Jenny?" asked Lucifer. "Sure," I said. "Why have you been avoiding Mark?" I sighed again. "I don't know, Lucifer," I said. I went over to the table to pick up my tablet and pocketed it. I left the gazebo and absently started to wander the gardens. I think it's because I have a hard time trusting people. I was scared that he loved me and that I love him. I stopped walking. Shit. Loving someone is a bad thing? Asked Lucifer. No, it's not, but... I can't ask him to go with me. What if I die while we're there? What if he dies? What if they remember him? Wouldn't that be a liability? It's possible, yes, although he's much older now than when he left, said Lucifer. And if I went by myself, I couldn't tell him where I was going. He'd freak out. That is also true, the AI said. And he might try to come after you if he found out about your mission after you're gone. Ugh, I groaned. Lucifer, you're not helping. Aren't you supposed to be the wise AI with all the answers? I'm sorry, Jenny, but I can't make this decision for you, Lucifer said. What I can say, though, is that it's always preferable to have someone you trust who's got your back. Mostly it's a friend, but sometimes it's a lover. Most humans I've known have deemed it worth the risk to have the ones they love with them, regardless of the situation. I opened my mouth, then shut it again. They weren't wrong. Mark did tell me his secret, and he accepts me as I am. He's also been persistent, I thought, as I looked at the messages he'd sent over the last couple of months. Not in a creepy way, but this last message sounded like he thought I didn't like him. Oh, gods, I said, and decided to leave the gardens and go back to my quarters. As I walked back to the lifts, I said, I'll sleep on it. That is not a bad idea, Jenny, but don't take too long, Lucifer said. I wondered what they meant by that, but I decided to put it out of my mind for now. You don't mind if I have my own encryption codes, do you, Lucifer? It's not that I don't trust yours, but, well... I don't mind, Jenny, as long as they don't interfere with my own communications. Your work is rather interesting, though. Would you mind if I had a look at it? I felt my eyes widen in surprise. Sure, go ahead. Is she in her office, Lucifer? Yes, and she doesn't have an appointment for an hour and a half. Thanks. I triggered my code, then connected with the station. After a moment, my tablet showed Marcia's face. Hi, Jenny. Give me a minute. She muted her screen. I could see she was talking to someone. While I waited, she stopped talking, then rifled with something on her desk. She finally unmuted. Sorry, I was just checking in with Jack. How's he doing? I asked. Okay. The captain asked him to tell his story the other day. I've been trying to make him take a couple of days off, but, well... I laughed. Pot kettle, Marcia. You should be taking some time off, too. Are you really okay to be working? She gave me a look that rivaled my mother's. I don't have that much of a choice, Jenny, she said quietly. There is no one else. Oh, I said, I guess you're right. I'm just, well, I care about you, Marcia. You've been kind of like a mom since I've been on station, so yeah. She smiled. Thanks, Jenny. That means a lot. I smiled back. Do you have a bit of time? I kind of need some motherly advice, actually. I mean, if you're busy, I can call back later. I have time. My next session got canceled, so what's up? I played with my braid. Have you ever been in love? The chaplain grinned. A long time ago, but yes. How did you know? Marcia narrowed her eyes. This is about Mark, isn't it? I sighed. Yeah. Right, well, for me, there was just a moment when I knew. It surprised me, actually, but it felt right at the time. She frowned. It didn't end well for me, though. The love part was a bit short-lived since I didn't understand my asexuality then, and she couldn't deal with it. There was a pause. Sorry, Jenny, I suppose I'm not the best person to ask. But I do know that people who have been in long-term relationships say that it wasn't complicated. The person just fit into their lives. They knew that the person that they were in love with had their backs, and they could rely on them without judgment. Lucifer said something similar, I said. Marcia chuckled. That doesn't surprise me. From what I understand, they've been watching and learning from humans for a few hundred years. I nodded. Listen, you should talk to Mark, Jenny. Jack was just telling me that Mark came to him to ask about you because you haven't replied to his messages. If you love him, you should tell him, then figure things out. If you don't love him, you should still tell him, so that you don't have anything left hanging when you're off doing whatever Lucifer wants you to do. Marcia had a faraway look. You'll regret it if you leave and don't settle things. I nodded again. Did Mark tell you about who he is? Marcia nodded. He was terrified of Morgan and what he could do to you. Makes me wonder what happened to him on New Harmony to make him that scared. He talked to Jack more about his time on New Harmony than me, but Jack only told me that what Mark went through was horrifying and it's a miracle Mark is doing as well as he is. But if Unity picked him up, they would have sent him to therapy and all that. Jack also mentioned that Mark felt bad about the last time you two saw each other. I sighed, and tears threatened to come. I know. He sent me a message a couple of days ago and said as much. I just didn't know how to reply. Do you love him? She asked. Yes, I replied without really thinking about it. Can you imagine your life without him? No, I said, surprising myself. Marcia just smiled back through the tablet. I think you have your answer then. Yeah, I said. I guess you're right. Her smile got wider. I think it's time you made another call, huh? Yeah, you're right about that too. Thanks, Marcia. I'm glad you're doing okay. Tell Jack I said hi. Thanks, I will. Good luck, she said, and disconnected. Lucifer, where's Mark right now? I asked. He has the day off. It looks like he's in his quarters. Oh, good, I said. I want him to come with me, Lucifer. Is that okay? Yes, that is preferable, and it will make your legend more believable. I took a breath. That's not why I'm asking him, though. I know, said Lucifer. You two are well matched. What? I said. Well, my siblings and I tend to be matchmakers, you see. It's something we learned from our creator, especially in the beginning, as procreation of both humans and AIs was a top priority. In the beginning of Survey, we didn't know if humanity on Earth had survived or not. So you think Mark and I should have children? I said. I would be honored to see it happen, especially if you came to live on my ship after your mission. Well, maybe one thing at a time, I said, feeling my cheeks grow hot. Yes, I agree. I keyed in the encryption again and pinged Mark's tablet. Yeah? Came a sippy voice. Hey, Mark, it's me. Mark's face filled the screen. I could tell he was on his bunk. He sat up. Jenny! His face flushed. I'm so sorry about that last conversation before we left. I've been wanting to talk to you all this time. Mark, it's okay. I'm not mad at you. You aren't? No. I almost laughed at the look of relief on his face. Sometimes he was so easy to read. I smiled instead. Are you okay over there? What have you been up to? He asked. I'm doing okay, and I've thought about a lot of things, including the last message you sent me. Mark looked nervous. Yeah? I nodded. I love you, Mark. I want to be with you, but Lucifer has this mission. Oh, he said as his face fell. I want you to go with me, I continued, but I can't force you to go with me. I then told him the details. His face was awash with a mix of determination and fear as he listened. When I finished, I said, I'd understand if you didn't want to do it. I don't want to make you do anything you don't want to do. I'm going, he said without hesitation. You sure? I asked. I'm going, he said again. This time I actually started crying. I love you, Mark. I love you too, Jenny. I wouldn't want you to go there alone. Not if I can be the one to watch your back. I just smiled through my tears. Now that Jenny has vouched for you and you have agreed to the mission, Mark, you will need to inform your captain of your decision and do the requisite paperwork. You can transfer over when we're ready to leave, said Lucifer. You'll be declared a Survey citizen when you come aboard. Mark's eyes widened. Thank you, Lucifer. He looked me in the eye. Call me later tonight. I'm off today, but I'm working first shift tomorrow. I've missed talking to you. I missed you too, Mark. Call you at 2200? He nodded. I love you. I love you too, I said, then closed the connection. I sat back in my chair, and even knowing that what we were going to do, to know we'll be doing it together, made my heart feel light. Chapter 20. Jack. The time ticked away, with the Escapers' communications moving closer to real time as they got closer to station. As soon as receiving the Escapers' transmissions took less than a day, Marcia and the two psychologists from Lightbringer started talking to each of the team members in turn, assessing their mental states. When I wasn't monitoring comms up in ops, I was making sure that Marcia and the other psychologists slept and ate. We assigned Lucifer's psych team quarters on station so they didn't have to go back and forth. After the first few days, Mark quietly joined me in caring for them as his schedule permitted. He seemed happier, but I also wondered if part of that was he felt safer closer to me and Marcia while Morgan was still on the station. Or it could have been that, like the rest of us who were just waiting for the Escapers' return, this was one way not to feel helpless. To be honest, I really didn't care either way. The help was welcome, and I trusted Mark more than most other people. He was one of the ensigns that had adopted me, and we had become close friends after I yelled at him that day in the mess. Close enough, in fact, that he confessed that he was a refugee from a lost colony, which was still somewhat of a shock. I tried not to think about the stuff with the new harmonist too often as the Escaper got closer, because it was more important to stay focused on the present. When the Escaper was just about 20 AUs from the station, the medical teams working on the samples called an emergency meeting. Marcia was in a session with one of the pre-call teams, so I went to the meeting for her, slipping her a text to let her know that she didn't have to stop her session. I walked into the conference room and I could feel the tension from the medical team like a wall. I sat down knowing that whatever this was going to be, it wasn't going to be good news. Okay, Carr, said the captain as they entered the room. Let's hear it. The CMO motioned to the head of xenobiology from the Lightbringer. I think I'll let Dr. Sinjay explain. Dr. Sinjay was a small, elegant woman wearing a bright pink sari. She stood up, frowned, and nodded. The first thing is that this bacteriovirus, as we're calling it, digs its DNA into the muscle cells and inhibits proper cellular energy production and cellular function. So for those who use their muscles a lot, like the younger soldiers who would try and push through what they just saw as fatigue, they get sicker faster. This disease inhibits the cell's normal ATP and waste functions, making it hard for the muscle cells to get rid of things like lactic acid or get energy from glucose. In layman's terms, doctor, said the captain, basically it's like you're always at the end of a marathon with overtaxed muscles, but instead of doing it by running, it's because this bacteriovirus is making your muscles think they've been overworked. Which brings us to the first roadblock we've hit. We can see the bacteriovirus DNA in the mitochondrial DNA in samples that we took from the team, but we can't remove it, and none of the common ways of blocking genes are working, because there are extra base pairs that are completely different to Earth DNA. It'll take a lot longer than 2 weeks to come up with a cure. How long? The captain asked. The scientist looked at the CMO, who answered, We just don't know. The room got quiet as that sunk in. I could see the captain's thoughts as plain as day. I'm going to have to tell the people in the Escaper that there's no cure for their disease. Beckett ran their fingers through their hair, then said, You said this was the first roadblock? What's the second? Dr. Carr answered, When the disease copies itself, it's shed into bodily fluids, including exhalation. The air and water samples were full of this thing. It's a natural part of the planet's ecosystem, but reacts badly with human bodies. So what you're saying is that it's airborne. The scaper is full of this bacterial virus, and it would spread through the air and waste recycling systems once they got on station. Yes, quite rapidly. The captain stared at the CMO for a moment, almost as if they were trying to will the other doctor to say something different. Any other bad news about this thing? Sinjay spoke. We can't kill it by normal means either. What? It resists most chemical and radiological methods of killing bacteria and viruses. We've tried spacing it, and it just goes dormant. Autoclave sterilization makes it go dormant as well. Incineration will kill it, but, well... The woman shrugged, then finally sat down. So the quarantine hab won't be enough to contain it, and we don't know how long it's going to take to figure out how to counter it, correct? Yes, said Carr. The captain looked at me briefly, then said, and psychologically they can't stay in the hab the whole time or they'd go insane. I nodded shortly, as did the CMO. That is correct, the doctor said. Besides, we can't guarantee that the quarantine hab would contain it. The room was quiet as we all watched the captain think things through. They steepled their fingers in front of them, looking far in the distance. We waited. Jack, have we heard from the Roanoke yet? They asked. No, sir. Theoretically, they should have been within picket distance now, but there's been no communication since they first said they were on their way. The captain frowned at this, but the news seemed to help them make a decision. Lucifer, can we evacuate the station onto the Lightbringer? The pre-call team can live pretty comfortably on the station instead of the hab. There's enough of the team to keep the station running. Most of the systems are automated anyway, and supplies are dropped by picket. If the station needed any major repair, Unity teams could come in EV suits. Yes, Captain Beckett. I can accommodate your staff until they transfer to a Unity vessel for transport. It would also be possible for me to leave a team here in their own living and laboratory modules so that they can continue the research on the disease. If I know my scientists, and I do, they will petition me to do so once this meeting is finished. Sinjay blushed, but gave a small smile, confirming that was already on her mind. We will also need to discuss the people you have in detention. I'm willing to take them on, but only until the Unity ship arrives, and only if you can provide a security escort. Understood, said the captain. We can discuss that after I announce the evacuation to the rest of the crew and the pre-call team. Anything else? The CMO looked like he was going to say something, but the captain held up a hand. Yes, Doctor, you can stay with Lucifer's team to research this. Any junior members of your team who are interested in staying can talk to the XO after the announcement. They looked around the room again, then ordered, Dismissed. The captain and the XO went to ops, and I followed. I took over the comm station, and as I did, Marcia walked in. Oh good, Marcia, you're here. We're going to have to evacuate the station, the captain stated matter-of-factly. Marcia's eyes widened at this, and the captain filled her in about what was said in the meeting. I busied myself with incoming mail, but concentrating was difficult. Memories of my pre-call scaper kept trying to creep into the present, and I dreaded seeing the video from this scaper after the captain tells them the news. They're not going to like this at all, Sam, Marcia said after Beckett had finished. They were hoping for some miracle once they got here. A lot of them were hoping to go back to their colonies. We're going to have a lot of work to do to help them accept this. I know, they snapped. But better to be able to live in some sort of damn life on a station than dying in a quarantine hab or a scaper. Marcia remained still as stone. I was shocked, too. It was the first time I'd ever heard the captain even be short with anybody. Mark, who was on shift manning operations, was trying to melt into the bulkhead. I looked over at him and tried to give him a reassuring look, but the ensign's demeanor didn't change. I couldn't blame the poor kid. The XO was the only person who wasn't fazed by this reaction from the captain. Putting their head in their hands, the captain took a deep breath, rubbed their eyes and head, then looked back at Marcia. Their eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot with dark circles under them. I hadn't noticed how tired they looked in the meeting, but now it seemed as if they had aged in the last few months. They took another breath, then said quietly, "I'm sorry, Marcia." "It's okay, Sam," she replied. They shook their head. "No, it's not, but I shouldn't take this out on you or anyone else." They paused, then said a little louder, "Jack, set up the comms channel. Let's get this over with." "Yes, sir," said, and opened the channel. The lead scientist understood what was going on, since he was a biochemist, but most of the rest of the team was devastated and depressed. 2 more of the team attempted suicide within a day. Because they were so weak, they could barely manage to hold their chosen tools. Marcia asked a few more trained counselors from Lightbringer to join her, and they started doing round-the-clock shifts. I recruited more people to help with making sure that all the psychologists and counselors were fed and cared for, along with all the preparations everyone was making to move to the Lightbringer. Since it was a planned evacuation and we had time before the pre-call team was going to be living on station, the captain wanted everything inventoried, including the religious supplies. I didn't mind. I was grateful for the reprieve from comms duty. Hearing the comm traffic from the scaper in near real time was a constant reminder of the past. Because she was so busy, I packed up Marcia's office for her. It was strange to think of how much I learned in this office in the past 2 years. Marcia said I'd changed a lot, but in some ways I didn't feel all that different. But remembering the first day I arrived on station, I could see that Marcia was right. Who knew that the nosy busybody who sat at my table that day would become the most important person in the world to me? If I was being honest with myself, I couldn't imagine my life without her. What did that mean, though? Did I love her? The answer was immediate. Yes, I do. I paused unfolding one of the tapestries from the wall of Marcia's office. I was in love with her, and would protect her until the day I die. The realization surprised me. It wasn't the same kind of relationship that I had had with Hans, and I knew she was asexual. I didn't want that from her anyway. It was more than a mother and son relationship, but she was family to me, and I loved her. That love was just as deep as what Hans and I had, and just as real. "Don't overthink it, child. Love doesn't have rules, it just happens," the Morrigan said. "Take it where you find it." "Oh, thank the gods. I was worried I'd have to do that all by myself," Marcia said from the doorway, where she was leaning wearily. I felt my cheeks grow hot for a second and finished folding the tapestry to cover it. "Well, since you've been so busy and I had to inventory the religious supplies, I figured I'd help you out," I said. I took the last mask off the wall, slipped it between the folds of the tapestry, and closed the box. "I didn't go through your desk, though. It looks like there's enough room in your storage box for whatever you need to put in there." The chaplain nodded, then came all the way into the office and sprawled on the nearest chair. "Oh, sit down, Jack. It's the end of the day. Let's take a break." I moved the box to the floor and sat in the desk chair. We sat in companionable silence for a while. She's one of the few people I could just relax with, and I realized that the Morrigan was right. I loved her, and that was enough. "Remind me, when did we go over to the Lightbringer?" she asked. "Once the scaper is within 3 days of docking," I said. "Non-essential personnel, our luggage, and our criminals go over tomorrow." She nodded. "Are you okay, Marcia?" I asked. "I'm exhausted, Jack. I'm worried about these people on the scaper. I'm worried about the captain. I'm worried about Dr. Carr. I just have a feeling this is too easy." I gave her a confused look, and she waved her hand. "Not in the sense that this is all solved and happily ever after, but that Lucifer got here so quickly, and they were in the right place at the right time, and that we can leave the station for the pre-call team so they can have some semblance of a life. There's something more coming, I feel it." I nodded. I had told her earlier about the conversation I'd had with Mark, where he told me about his life story, and like Marcia, I too felt something coming. "I know what you mean," I said. We sat in silence for a bit. Then she looked at me. "What were you thinking about when I came in? You seemed lost in thought." How did I say this? "Well, I was thinking about how you've become like family to me." Marcia looked at me with one of her soul-searching stares. "Yes?" "My family on Earth is complicated. I know my mom and dad's love me, but it's not enough? I shook my head. She frowned. I can't give you romance if that's what you're looking for. She started to get up from her chair. Oh, crap, this wasn't going well. No, wait, I said, holding up my hand. That's not what I want from you. Not at all. Then what? I took a breath. You're closer to me than my blood family ever was. Maybe even closer to me than Hans was. You've given me nothing but unconditional love and care. I just want to be someone you can lean on too. To be your partner. I don't need romance, Marcia, but I do need... I waved my arms in the air, not able to find the right words. Damn it, I'm screwing this up. I put my head in my hands. There was silence for a minute, then a soft rustle next to me. Marcia was kneeling down next to my chair. She held out her hand, and I took it. The older woman nodded and said, No, you're not. And something shifted between us. I smiled a small smile, and she smiled back. And for a moment I could feel the Morrigan looking through me and saw a different set of eyes looking through hers. Surprised, we both laughed, then hugged each other. Well, that settles that, I suppose, she said, standing up. I guess so, I replied. You should get some sleep. Yes, so should you. She made her way to the door. Good night, Jack. Good night, Marcia. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me in my writing, there are many ways to do it. Share this podcast, follow me on my Twitch channel, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revgenapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.